Assalamu alaikum and namaskar. Welcome today to our panel discussion. I want to begin by acknowledging the people of Rangitane, whose land, knowledge, Aroha, and Manakitanga form the basis of this discursive infrastructure in which we are participating in the conversation. Today, we are gathered at a significant moment in Indian history as the nation is being transformed from a secular democratic republic to a religious nation with the inauguration of the Ayodhya Temple marking this transformation. We are here today to discuss the ideology of Hindutva and its relationship with the celebration of the Ayodhya Temple, and what are its meanings for the diaspora. We are joined today by some amazing activists, community organizers, and researchers who will respond on this panel. We have with us today the Muslim community leader, Dr. Anisur Rahman. Dr. Rahman is a leader who has been with the Muslim community for over 3 decades, and he has been recognized in the Hamilton City with its Civic Award, which is one of its highest awards for his leadership and contributions. He is also father of our friend and activist interlocutor, Anjum Rahman. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
We also have with us today Dr. Sapna Saman, who is a general practitioner and an activist. We know Sapna, those of us in the diaspora context, as an activist who has been perhaps the sole voice challenging Hindutva and its public registers over the last decade. She has done so often at great personal cost. And Sapna's activism has been vital to the kinds of discursive registers we have today in engaging these conversations here in Aotearoa. Sapna is a founding member of Aotearoa Alliance for Progressive Indians and also a member of Hindus for Human Rights, Australia, New Zealand chapter. It's great to have you with us, Sapna.
Kia ora. Kia ora, namaste.
Kia ora. We also have with us today Byron Clark. Byron is a researcher who needs no introduction. His research on disinformation and hate has been really vital to understanding the landscape of fear-based campaigns here in Aotearoa. His book, Fear, has been one of the bestsellers in the New Zealand charts. And Byron, again, like Sapna, has continued to challenge various forces of hate and has borne that with his body in very personal ways. We are really excited to have Byron with us as he has this ability to connect the various threads of far-right movements and see how they speak to each other and dialogue with each other. So Byron, it's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Kia ora, thank you.
Do we have Kamran Bhai already? We will also be joined by Mr. Kamran Cheda, hopefully, who is a Muslim community leader and activist who is an Indian Muslim, and he hopefully will be able to bring to us an understanding from the perspective of the Indian Muslim community in terms of the challenges and negotiations of Hindutva in Aotearoa, and what this particular moment, which is the celebration of the Ayodhya Temple, means for the Indian Muslim community. So I will go ahead and get us started with a brief presentation that will take about 10 minutes, and then we will ask each of you, Dr. Rahman, Dr. Saman, Byron, and Kamran to respond, and then we can open up to a conversation. So what I thought I will do in this brief presentation is draw an outline of the networked infrastructure of Hindutva, meaning how the political ideology of Hindutva, which seeks to construct India as a Hindu nation, is connected across the diaspora, therefore outlining what is its relevance to us here in Aotearoa. I will do this within the context of the discussion of the Ayodhya Temple, which is the temple celebrating Lord Ram that is built in the space called Ayodhya, which in Hindu mythology is celebrated as the birthplace of Lord Ram, and talk particularly about what the history of the Ayodhya Temple is, and why is it important to look at this history when engaging in conversations about Hindutva and the diaspora. So we will begin by looking at Hindutva and the Ram Janmabhoomi movement, which is the birthplace of Lord Ram around the building of the temple movement. So the celebration of the temple that we are seeing today, it's a culmination of over 3-decade long movement that started in the 1980s and is described as the Ram Janmabhoomi, or the birthplace of Lord Ram movement. This movement resulted in, or a key site in this movement was the destruction of the Babri Masjid. You can see here this process of destruction of the masjid, where the Kar Sevaks of the Hindutva volunteers had come from all across India in this chariot procession, and then had started hitting the temple with various kinds of equipments, ultimately leading to the demolition of the mosque. We will talk about that process of the demolition of the mosque. I'm sorry, I said temple, I meant the mosque and its destruction. Then we will look at the process through which Hindutva seeks its hegemony in Aotearoa, and what its relationship is with crown politicians, and particularly the role of crown politicians attending Hindutva events, in this context attending the Ram Mandir inauguration, and what that signifies for the Indian diaspora. We will then transition into making the argument for why, within this context, when talking about the Indian diaspora, it is important to look at the heterogeneity and the diversity and the multiplicity of the diaspora. The diaspora is not just Indian Hindus. Within this context, why is it important to listen to the voices of Indian Muslims? So the Ram Janmabhoomi movement as a key resource in the process of Hindutva's arrival into hegemony, into the place of dominance, is marked around this communicative process of turning mythology or stories into politics, turning aspects of religion, myth making within religion, into a political infrastructure that forms then the basis of Hindutva as a political movement that seeks to establish India as a Hindu nation or Hindu Rashtra. So in this sense, Hindutva is a modernist movement, and the literature extensively documents the relationship of Hindutva with the fascist movements, the linkages of Hindutva with Nazi ideology, constructed around this notion of cultural essentialism and cultural supremacy that forms the basis of the articulation of the nation, constructed in a hierarchy based upon the inside and the outside of the nation, based upon the pure citizens of the nation and the impure others that are outside of the nation. Now, Of the various Hindutva organizations, or what is called Sangh Parivar, a key organization is the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, or the VHP. And the VHP played a central role in mobilizing the Karsevaks, the volunteers across India, in recruiting them into this momentum toward um, uh, organizing around the dismantling of the Babri Masjid. And the narrative that is constructed here is that the Babri Masjid, which is this 16th century mosque, sits on the site of the birthplace of Lord Ram. That was, according to this construction, destroyed by the Muslims. So the establishment of the Hindu Rashtra then is the process of undoing these past injustices. And this forms the basis of the majoritarian politics of Hindutva, where the Hindu majority is turned into a space of victimhood. Um, and this victimhood is constructed in a narrative that articulates the Muslim sort of section of the population in the language of the invaders. So the Muslim invaders destroyed the temples and erected the mosque. Then the revisionism of the movement is this process of destroying the mosque to then build the temple. So the Ayodhya Temple that is being celebrated today is part of this process that was initiated with the Ram Janmabhoomi movement that then led to the destruction of this mosque by the Karsevaks, organized in this Ratha Yatra, which was this chariot procession that was taken out by Hindutva leaders across India. Now, one of the key features of this movement in terms of its recruitment strategies was the ways in which in the 80s it used the cassette player, the audio cassette, and vernacular media to disseminate its message of hate, to disseminate its message of othering, to recruit volunteers into the movement. Salient here, for instance, are roles of Hindutva ideologues such as Sadhvi Ritambara, who would deliver deeply Islamophobic hate speeches that would be recorded and then played on cassette players from community to community in this process of recruiting into this movement. Now, you fast forward 30 years then, as the Hindutva organizations, and particularly the political arm of Hindutva, the Bharatiya Janata Party, or BJP, which seeks to govern with this mandate, have been elected on the basis of the support generated through this movement, has then been a key player in terms of constructing and shaping the court processes. So the court judgments that have subsequently been made that have then opened the doorway into the building of the Ayodhya Temple, which is then what we are seeing at this moment. So the demolition of Babri Masjid then communicates a few key messages, and I wanted to highlight four of these. One of these is this notion of the returning of the lost civilization. So the return of the lost Hindu civilization as a way for building a Hindu India. And if you think about this construct of a Hindu India in that sense, it very much draws upon and replicates the ideological infrastructures of fascist formations. Built into this project of returning the lost civilization is the political aspiration to build Rama Rajya. In Hindutva, the idea of Ram Rajya, or the kingdom of Lord Ram, forms the basis for the Hindu Rashtra, the Hindu nation. So then there are two features here that are critical for us to think through. One is the ways in which the demolition of the Babri Masjid is the other side of the building of the Ram Temple in Ayodhya. And as in the current discourse, as the Ram Temple is being celebrated as a site of peace and harmony with the narrative of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family. Of course, what is critical to remember and what it strategically obfuscates and erases is the underlying infrastructure, which is the demolition of the mosque and the violence that is connected to it. And this then forms the basis for ongoing discourses of future demolitions and destructions of Muslim cultural heritage sites and spaces across India, with the idea of finding temples that sit beneath these mosques. So this process that has unfolded by Hindutva, particularly the destruction of the Babri Masjid, has been accompanied by systemic acts of violence, communal violence across India that have seen a large number of deaths, and of course, with Muslims being disproportionately impacted as a result of this violence. So what is the linkage of the Indian diaspora in global networks with the Ram Janmabhoomi movement? The Indian diaspora's investment in identity and its politics of cultural identity through cultural essences. So finding essences to build a sense of identity as a way for building relationships, building community ties, upholding community, is connected with Hindutva's project of cultural nationalism. So cultural Hindutva and its deep-seated Islamophobia is intertwined with the processes of recruitment of diaspora into the folds of Hindutva and into the interpenetrating relationships between the diaspora and Hindutva. On one hand, diaspora Hindu communities have been critical in terms of offering political funding, material infrastructures, and volunteerism to Hindutva organizations. In India, the Ram Janmabhoomi movement drew much of its funding from the diaspora. And on the other hand, Hindutva movement in India offers diaspora its identity, its cultural essence and anchor, and its ability to actually project itself as an anchor in the broader multicultural sphere of democracy. So the funding flows and volunteer flows are really critical to look through when examining the question of diaspora and Hindutva. Now, we will turn to the question of the role of crown politicians here in Aotearoa in the celebrations of Ram Mandir. So if we look at Hindutva as a political project of cultural nationalism that seeks to construct India as a Hindu nation. Moreover, Hindutva is identified by security intelligence agencies as a form of extremism. It is then, within that context, critical to interrogate what is the role of crown politicians in relationship with Hindutva organizations and Hindutva-related celebrations. So as we have established by looking at the evidence in front of us, that the celebration of the Ayodhya Temple is a key feature of the Hindutva project. Then let's look at the presence of crown politicians here in Aotearoa at the event celebrating the Ram Mandir. So here you have Mr. David Seymour, who is Minister for Regulations, appear at the Eden Park event that celebrated the Sri Ram Mandir in Ayodhya. And this was posted on Mr. Seymour's Facebook page, as well as picked up by Indian media, including various far-right Hindutva platforms. if you look at what Mr. Seymour is articulating here, it is critical to pay attention to his use of the term Ram Rajya, which is sort of the basis for in the ecosystem of Hindutva. That is the basis for building the Hindu Rashtra. And he says, much like Ram Rajya, ACT stands for fairness, inclusivity, and accountability in modern societies. So it is really critical to question that. And then here in the video excerpt that has gone viral in Hindutva networks in India, he's seen chanting Jai Shri Ram and then attributing to the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, the leadership role in bringing about this moment. And here it is really critical to interrogate the role of Mr. Modi in the Gujarat pogrom that saw the deaths of a large number of Muslims, and his ongoing role in terms of the governance of India that has seen Muslims increasingly experience the growing forms of hate and violence, including the digital spaces in India reaching genocidal proportions in terms of the discourses of hate. So let's listen here to Mr. Seymour.
Hi, I'm David Seymour. I'm the leader of the ACT Party in New Zealand. I'm also the Minister for Regulation in the New Zealand Government and the Member of Parliament for Epsom. I'm very pleased to be here today. Jai Shri Ram to the entire Bharat, and what a wonderful celebration of a monument that will last 1,000 years. Congratulate everybody in India, including and especially Mr. Modi for his leadership that has made this construction possible after 500 years. Ready to last another 1,000 years. It's a testament to what people can do. So I wish Mr. Modi courage and wisdom as he helps over 1 billion people in India navigate the challenges of our world today. I hope that he will have strength and faith that allows him to see the challenges before they become crucial and wisely help the Indian nation navigate through them. Well, I'd be delighted to visit the Ram Temple. Very happy to discuss any opportunities with the Indian government. I wish you all the best for a wonderful, wonderful celebration. Hi, I'm David Seymour.
So there are multiple parts of this brief snippet that we can interrogate, like what does he mean by Indians? What India is he representing and referring to in this snippet? What does he mean by this monument is a moment of celebration for whom, and what does that entail? And we should be asking those critical questions. This event was also attended by the Minister for Ethnic Communities, Melissa Lee, and let's hear her speak at the event.
Hi everyone, my name is Melissa Lee. I'm New Zealand's Minister for Ethnic Communities. I also hold Economic Development, Media and Communications and Associate ACC. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish the Indian diaspora around the world, particularly in New Zealand, the celebration of the inauguration of the Ram Mandir in Ayodhya. Congratulations to the Prime Minister Modi on the inauguration of Ram Mandir after 500 years. And I'd like to congratulate all of the Bharat on this amazing mandir. I believe it is actually the Modi ji who's actually been championing this mandir, right? Ram Mandir. And I think this mandir, Ram Mandir, has actually been a result of Modi ji's work and his championing of resurrecting this mandir. I think with Prime Minister Modi, I think the fact that so many Indian people in India actually elect him as the Prime Minister, and the government has actually been elected many times, and I think it shows the power of his his desire to get India forward, grow the economy, and actually have better relationship with the rest of the world. And I think it's actually a good thing. Modi ji is respected around the world, and I think he does very good for the people of India. And we would love to actually improve our relationship with India. And, with our Prime Minister potentially visiting India and Modi ji actually visiting New Zealand will be a fantastic thing to have. Come to New Zealand, Modi ji. We'd love to have you in New Zealand.
Once again, it is worth interrogating which Indian community is the minister referring to, and which part of the Indian community is the minister referring to. Muslim Indians feel represented in this articulation of the Indian community? And we will hear about that in just a little bit.
Hi.
So this presence then of crown politicians at the ceremony is picked up in the Hindutva architecture, in the Hindutva ecosystem. The far-right platform opindia.com, which has historically and systematically disseminated anti-Muslim hate and disinformation, takes up the information and does a story which goes viral. But it is also interesting to note the kinds of engagements we see on Mr. Seymour's Facebook platform. So the Jai Shri Ram chant is reciprocated, and then we have the slogan, "One country, one policy for all," or "We are all New Zealanders that want the best for our country." So it's important to interrogate the Hindutva discourse in relationship to the discourse around referendum on Titiriti. And here's one of the participants on that platform was much clearer, and this image has the account is an image of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa, and it says, "Make New Zealand secular, no more forced hakas or nose-rubbing ceremonies for non-Maoris." So you can see the anti-Maori hate, "No more prayers before business meetings, give non-Maoris an opt-out to superstitious or cultural nonsense." It's quite interesting, actually. The irony here is really powerful, that this is being articulated in the midst of the celebration of an event marking the building of a temple, the entire infrastructure of which is based upon, one might argue, superstitions and cultural nonsense. So I wrap up with that, and I look forward to hearing our panelists' response. We will go to Dr. Rahman first, and then we will move on to Dr. Samant, and then Mr. Cheda, and we will wrap up with you, Byron, connecting the threads together.
Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Yes, very interesting to put the whole story in a nutshell from you. I'm one of the members of New Zealand Muslim community, of the pioneers of the Muslims in this country. I've been here for over 50 years now, and I've been out of India for some 55 years. The India that I grew in is quite different to India today. My first 20 years were spent in India, and we had no differentiation of people on the basis of religion, Hindus and Muslims. We didn't differentiate. We all were friends. We lived together. I went to many temples with my friends, waited outside while they went inside, and vice versa. My friends, they came with me to the mosques, waited outside while I went inside. That's the India that I knew. And all this, what has happened, what you briefed, has happened while I have been outside of the country, but watching with interest of which way the country is heading, and feel very sad of this differentiation between people being brought out on the basis of religion, which never was before. I'm sure other people will have more to say, but I just like to say that as a New Zealand Muslim and a Muslim of Indian descent, where first 20 years were spent in that country, and I've always kept in touch. My family is there. I feel very sad about the way the things are happening, and also the way the New Zealand politicians are being brought into the picture, uh, not realizing of the facts that whether they're representing the wishes and the feelings of the all Indians. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahman, for sharing that sense of the community. And one of the things you noted is the change that you have witnessed over the period of time. Is there a particular point where the change became apparent for you?
I haven't kept as close an eye on the political situation in India as one would like, but certainly since the BJP government has come in, and particularly in my part of the country, Uttar Pradesh, where I come from, there have been many changes taking place slowly. For the last 15 or so years, I suppose.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for sharing. We will have an opportunity to have greater dialogue. Let me bring into conversation Dr. Samant. Sapna, if you would respond, please.
Oh gosh, this so my heart is very heavy today because I witnessed the demolition of Babri Masjid. I witnessed the Rath Yatra and the trail of violence that swept through Mumbai. Then it was Bombay. And I remember how L.K. Advani, who was leading the Rath Yatra, it was just like a Bollywood set where you had cardboard cutouts of a chariot, a Hindu chariot, straight out of Amar Chitrakatha comics, attached to a car that just drove through, inciting violence. And I remember this, that Bihar was the only state that banned L.K. Advani from entering. That was Lalu Prasad Yadav, who was the chief minister that time. So it's very, very fresh in my mind. 6th of December, 1992. It was also the time when I realized my own radicalization, and finding a language to express how uncomfortable I was with my fellow Hindus who were just unseeing and did not see their own privilege and what they were taking India into. So I don't really understand how building a Ram Temple will progress India in any way. It's just a political fascist exercise and a commercial exercise. We've seen stories of land grab. We've seen stories of people whose homes have been demolished, Hindus who've not got any reimbursement for that. And they've been told to bear the pain because, Lord Ram was in pain for so many years without being in his own home. And I will also look at, we all know Hindu mythology, largely coming out of North India, that the names of places are not exactly where they were seem to be in these books, in the stories. They still dispute about where actually Lanka is. It's not the geographical Sri Lanka. So was Ram really born at Ayodhya? We don't know. Did it happen after the Tulsidas Ramayana, perhaps? And we all know that the Ram Lalla statue was snuck into the premises of Babri Masjid. I think 1948. Yeah, I think so. So, and I have seen the change. Growing up in an absolutely secular country, we never really had any issues with each other's religion or caste. And I'm saying this coming from a very privileged position, because I didn't experience it doesn't mean that others did not. Yeah, so what is happening today is really a very, very dark day. Yeah. I do want to add something, Mohan, if I have enough time. The comments that David Seymour and Melissa Lee make about Modi ji being instrumental in building this temple, it's a bit of a joke, really, because it was L.K. Advani and Murli Manohar Joshi and a couple of other old BJP leaders and VHP leaders who were at the forefront of this Ram Janmabhoomi movement. But Modi, being the narcissist he has erased to what is happening today. Some of them not even being invited. Yeah.
Thank you, Sapna. There is so much to reflect on there, particularly what you articulate in terms of the emotions of sadness and anger, watching sort of, this destruction of the Babri Masjid, if you will, also symbolizes in some ways the starting of the destruction of Indian secularism, which sort of has reached its culmination now with this full-on celebration of the Ayodhya Mandir. You look at the videos, the memes, the digital productions, and the ways in which that is circulating in the diaspora. It is almost as if Hindutva hate has percolated into the everyday fabric of Indians in the diaspora. So I can really relate to that. It's also interesting that you point to this narrative of Modi as strong man. So this reference to Modi as the architect of this temple, if you will, sits well alongside the majoritarian populism, particularly that form of majoritarian populism that is organized around authoritarian strong men, right? So that's where this narrative then needs to be continually propped up, the one of the strong man who is in charge of bringing about this transformation. So in the Hindu context, and not that this should not be interrogated, but it is also interesting that the prayers at the temple and the main acts at the temple are being performed by Modi. It is almost as if bypassing the priesthood and the hierarchical structure of Hinduism. So it's really interesting to watch how this is being manufactured around the strong man.
Yeah, just one thing though, like historically, even after that Ram Lalla, that is baby Ram statue, was snuck into the Babri Masjid premises, the akhada, which is the wrestlers pit, the akhada, which is their traditional Ram bhakts, devotees of Ram, who looked after that shrine for so many years. They have also been sidelined in this new temple, and priests appointed by the BJP government will do the ceremonies from now on. So it's interesting, the commercialization and taking away the traditional works, the traditional jobs of these Brahmin wrestlers away from them, and giving it to somebody that has been approved by a hierarchy is just really actually disempowering those people as well, because they were really responsible for, they were the grassroots workers, they were the kar sevaks, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, this politics itself is so interesting, isn't it, Sapna? Particularly in terms of, I mean, to a critique like what you're offering now, one would say that, well, you're reproducing a casteist narrative, and what we really have a problem with is Modi being someone from other backward castes, being really the person now that is taking the center and therefore disrupting the caste structure. It is really interesting how these narratives are made to work.
But the OBC, and this is the new thing, because there's a movement happening in Maharashtra right at this moment. And, obviously, this is just me reading stuff, because, again, I have caste privilege. So I can't speak for others. This is just an observation, is that, again, the OBC is it's something that the BJP has empowered, again, to use them as their foot soldiers. And Modi just happened to be that person, who moved up the ranks really quickly. Yeah.
So it's a really complex political terrain,
Yeah.
but very much organized around the complexities of majoritarian populism.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sapna. I look forward to continuing this conversation further. I will ask Kamran Bhai if you would like to come on, Mr. Cheda, and respond, particularly in terms of your experiences negotiating Hindutva here in Aotearoa and challenging it.
Thank you very much, Professor Datta. It's always a privilege to be addressing and talking to you and the team and Sapna and Brother Rahman. Everything you said, it was a part of what I have concerns with. But before I actually go to address that, I also want to tell you, I was on the 6th of December, I was visiting India, and I was caught in, there was a family marriage, and I had taken the whole team that had arrived from Bhopal for shopping in a place in Hyderabad called Lad Bazaar, which is basically where all the bangles and all these traditional things are sold. And then at 11 o'clock, they started breaking, and 1 o'clock, we had the whole police action starting, and it was ugly. I mean, it was all pre-planned, even though it was a Congress government. But unfortunately, the goons had already marked their things, and it was really horrific. We had ladies with us. And till today, when I think about that day, I cannot tell you, I was very young at that time, but I will never forget that day and the terror that spread, because we had 4 or 5 or 6 ladies who were shopping, just 2 men, and it was horrifying. So, and for people who really paid with their lives and paid with the price and still continue to pay, I just can't tell you, because I come from a background where my grandfather has been a freedom fighter. My father, with choice, did not go. He had immigration to America, and Canada did not go because we love India and we loved India. But what is happening is very sad. And now coming to New Zealand, as all of us are aware, unfortunately, the current government is very ignorant, and they are surrounded by people who are financially strong, and this is how they are able to get these people into their circles, but without thinking of, in my opinion, New Zealand's interest, and without thinking of how this country is made of so many different type of people. Even if you if you think of the Europeans who are here, they're not just from one side, they're from so many parts. So when they say 64% European, it's not, everybody is not the same. So when they come back and they talk about these things, and he as you rightly quoted in your presentation, Professor Datta, about how Mr. Seymour, basically, literally whitewashed everything that Hindutva has quoted. Basically, it looks like he was given a brief and he just repeated that. And repeating, because Jai Shri Ram, and nothing wrong with that being said in a religious manner, but that's being now said in a political manner. And I've actually recently had a cousin of mine who was visiting Bombay, and as he was just getting to the train station to get a train, 3 goons caught hold of him, and they said, say Jai Shri Ram, otherwise you're not getting into the train. And then he's just about to get into the train. He didn't want to argue about it. He just said that, but he said it was one of the most frightening times I had in my life, So even ordinary people, this is happening. Now imagine when this starts happening here. Already on the media, we counter a lot of hate. I have stopped reporting to the police. I've stopped reporting to the authorities because nothing much happens. And they ask you for so much proof that we have to get, nothing happens, unfortunately. And now with the new government, even that I hope I don't have. I'm so sorry to be blunt and straight about that. And not only me, we talk about the Muslim community here with what we have just seen happening with David Seymour doing what he's doing. We've completely got so not only disappointed, but very alarmed at what's going to come. So it is a very concerning thing. I have been following for several years now, since the Kashmir files happened, and since the CAA and other things happened. I've been following these very, very unreasonable kind of people who, just because you have a different thought and you say everybody has a right to live, everybody has a right to be what they are, they become abusive to you. And I'm sure you all are in the same service, and you also sometimes maybe receiving, a lot of social media threats and things. My daughter has been threatened several times. I mean, she works in downtown. She wears a hijab, and Sapna knows about this. And she was the first one who actually was very kind to caution her when she counseled her. But in all these years, this is what's happening. First-hand information I can give you. My wife and I, we used to be, since we came 35 years back, we used to be just treating this country like with no fear, because we left everything in India and came here and worked very hard. But now we are fearful. I must say, we are fearful, and we watch over our shoulders and our back to see, is something else going to happen? So it is a very sad time for New Zealand, and unless and until the government really realizes what they're doing, it's not about Hindus. Hindus are like us, like brothers. Yourselves, you know how we feel about them. We have no problem with anybody. It's just if it was anybody who has this extremist ideology, whether it is Muslims or Christians or Hindus or whatever religion they have, if they had any extremist ideology, we would be against them. Any racism, we would be against them. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Kamran Bhai, for your clarity of thought and for your insights. I wanted to just make a couple of notes based upon what you articulated. The chant Jai Shri Ram, you through empirical accounts of personal violence experienced, you documented how the chant itself is connected to violence. There is quite a bit of evidence empirically in terms of how the chant, for instance, is deployed by Hindutva while carrying out acts of communal violence and targeting Muslims. The chant has been used when Muslims are targeted and lynched. So the account that you offered is very powerful, that Muslims are targeted by groups of Hindutva people chanting Jai Shri Ram, and then they ask the Muslim person to chant Jai Shri Ram as they carry out the violence on them. It is also a chant that is often used by Hindutva to create a sense of fear and insecurity. So there have been instances of the chants being made as processions have been taken out by Hindutva in front of mosques or in Muslim areas. And the chant is also used to threaten dissenting voices. So, when those of us that have been targeted for Hindutva for questioning it, the chant is often used and directed at us. So that point about the chant being a part of the hate infrastructure and violent infrastructure is really critical. The other thing that you pointed out is the presence of Hindutva here in Aotearoa. And one of the things that I hear you saying is that Hindutva is very much present here, and Muslims negotiate the presence of Hindutva through the everyday threats that come to you, that are directed at you. And you're pointing to the limits of institutional structures to actually respond to that hate that you're representing. So when politicians then articulates such slogans, that hate is mainstreamed in many ways, isn't it?
It is. It is. And what is very, very sad, Professor Datta, to see is that when official of such high, I'm not even going to talk about the other person, because with all due respect to her, but when David Seymour goes there and gives this platform to them and says Jai Shri Ram and wrongly says everything that they wanted him to say, and you know the facts, you've already said it, so I don't want to repeat it. He says that after 500 years of suffering, I mean, what does he mean by that? 500 years of suffering, and this is there for
500 years of
6,000
struggle.
years.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's implying that really that the majority of Indians were made to suffer for the first 500 years, not only with this, with everything else. So basically, he's planting another seed of, sorry to say, racist hate seed, so that it strengthens the Hindutva and weakens people like us.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing, Kamran Bhai. We can have more of a discussion on this. I would love to invite Byron over now. No, thank you. I would love to invite Byron now for your perspective on how you see
Right.
sort of the strands of Hindutva populism connect with other aspects of the disinformation and hate networks we have been studying.
Yeah, well, it was quite shocking to see the comments from Seymour in that video. I mean, we've seen before New Zealand politicians attending Hindu events and then having those images go back to India and be promoted in media like the Organizer, the publication affiliated with the RSS, and in the past it's often been that happening to politicians, perhaps without their knowledge, and it sort of shows that some of the limitations of a liberal multiculturalism, where they might feel they're attending a cultural event and then they're being used for this sort of political purpose to promote a nationalist ideology. But what we heard from Seymour today was just this fawning praise for Modi, and I don't think that he could be ignorant of what he's saying there and what how those comments will be received both in India and by some of the diaspora here, and a similar thing from Melissa Lee as well with her comments. So this seems to be a change in what we've seen from New Zealand politicians regarding their appealing to those Hindutva elements that are in society here. I'm not entirely surprised to see that coming from David Seymour. While I wouldn't necessarily call him a far-right politician, he's certainly somebody who has appealed to the far right with things like his opposing of a lot of the recommendations from the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the mosque shooting. So leading the opposition to any kind of change to hate speech laws, as well as opposing further regulations on firearms. And of course, in addition to that, he's now very much leading this anti-treaty politics that we're seeing with the bill going through Parliament that wants to change the definition of the treaty principles. And so I can see there being perhaps a strategy there to, appeal to those Hindutva elements who have perhaps some commonalities with others who act as appealing to with these kind of policies. And while I think that might be an uneasy alliance at times, because I think a lot of what we would actually think of as the far right in this country, the white far right, does have a xenophobic or a racist attitude towards Hindus as well as Muslims. But perhaps someone like Seymour, who is not directly affiliated with that movement but occasionally appeals to them, perhaps he can be someone who can appeal to these different segments of society, whether that's the sort of Pākehā far right or also Hindutva elements, and perhaps he's someone who can pull together that kind of political coalition.
Kia ora, Byron. Thank you so much for that perspective. I also love the nuance in your analysis in terms of how you bring out the various tensions within. So it's not a monolith in that sense. But something you point to is sort of, and which is quite apparent, is David Seymour's the replication of the Hindutva narrative, if you will. It's like a full-on reproduction of the Hindutva narrative around Modi, right? Where do you think that comes from?
Yeah, I mean, it was again something of perhaps shocking is too strong a word, but a surprise to see that, because I think this goes beyond what we might hear from politicians and government who are, wanting to have diplomatic relationships between New Zealand and India and might be interested in, closer relationships around trade and things. I think you can be diplomatic towards the Indian Prime Minister without saying that he's going to make possible the construction of a temple that'll last for 1,000 years, and these sort of almost this real fawning praise of Modi that we see from both Seymour and from Melissa Lee. So I get the impression perhaps they had some coaching on what to say from the people who made those videos, or possibly they are more in touch with some of the some of those Hindutva elements in New Zealand. It would be interesting to know sort of who they've been talking to, and where that influence is coming from.
Something that we have noted in the past, and you and I have talked about this, and of course, this is published in the KL literature. For instance, we have had Hindutva-linked figures in politics in Aotearoa. Right, particularly with New Zealand First, we have seen that linkage quite clearly. There is also something that Kamran Bhai pointed out, which was in terms of the funding. And, that is also something worth interrogating, is that is there just more funding and investment into particular political parties that is coming from Indians or Indian businesses with Hindutva linkages,
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that may well be the case, and I think that's worth investigating. Whether there are donations coming to ACT, to National, from some of these individuals.
Yeah. Kia ora. Thank you so much, Byron, for that insight. It's lovely to have you contextualize what we have been talking about in the context of Hindutva with a broader understanding of what's going on in politics in Aotearoa. It would be great if we can have everyone on screen so that we can have a brief Correro. So the space is now open. If any of you wanted to share anything or ask a question for anyone else, this is the time to do it.
Can I say something about the last bit of conversation that you and Byron had with regards to potentially were David Seymour and Melissa Lee trained to speak the way they spoke? Is if you study how Hindutva language is used, you will realize that they have been given a text beforehand to learn. Because it's all hyperbole, like a 1,000-year temple that lasts 1,000 years they are very much referring to ancient Hindu temples that have predated colonization, even from the invasions, rather, even from potentially Alexander the Great. So that is what he means by it's going to last 1,000 years. Or the use of the word Bharat, because that's not something a non-Indian would use automatically. And a lot of us will say it when we're speaking in English, we're still going to say India, but a lot of us will say it when we're speaking in vernacular, in our mother tongues, or to each other in Hindi. And even then, it's not something that we use intentionally. It's always India, 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 you know. So definitely that is number one. But number two is that they're both talking about the connections between potentially who might have funded ACT or even National. Is if you look at the one example that Mohan just showed on his Facebook page, where some Indian person, Sonu Rathore, has said it is one people, one politics, or something like that. Can we bring that up? It's on a slide.
Yes.
That is very much Hindutva language, but it speaks with exactly what ACT is trying to do over here. You know, because this is Modi's refrain, one nation. Back in India, that one nation is the same. Yeah, that's the one. You're doing good. One country, one policy for all, which is the same language of erasure that David Seymour speaks, and the ACT Party. So of course there's overlap over there. I'm not surprised if these affiliations have been nurtured over a period of time. We saw that when Kashmir Files, the film was, and Kamran Bhai alluded to that before, when the film Kashmir Files was asked to be reclassified by the Indian Muslim community and the Kashmiri community over here. It was Seymour and Melissa Lee who jumped into this whole drama, adding the two bits. But those two bits did not come from what information or knowledge they might have. It came from what they have been told. So these are not new affiliations. It's just Seymour is emboldened because he's in government. Pretty much National is doing what Axe wants it to do. That's it.
I think, Sapna, one of the things it is worth interrogating is, like you point out, the synergies between the discourses. And one would argue that this notion of producing a homogeneous nation based upon this idea of equality for all, one policy for all, is very much a thread that you see in majoritarian populist movements. You see this, for instance, in the US right now, with the turn to the far right and the influence of the far right in US politics, with the attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, for instance, or with the attacks on critical race theory, that accommodating to difference takes away from equality for all. So that language that you rightly point out is the language of Hindutva is also very much the language of other forms of majoritarian populisms, isn't it? Dr. Rahman, did you want to add anything? Kamran Bhai?
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Speaking of the right in the US, it's been interesting seeing the rise of politicians like Vivek Ramaswamy and perhaps to a lesser extent Nikki Haley in the US Republican Party, and how this seems to be, bringing together some people with a more Hindutva background with the more American far right. And I wonder if we're possibly on the cusp of seeing something similar here.
one of the things I will note, Byron, that's a really good point. One of the things I will note is that, um, uh, with Vivek Ramaswamy, for instance, that he draws on a lot of the caste discourse, and he is seen talking about Modi in very admiring terms, right? But his links with Hindutva are not so explicit as it
I see.
is, for instance, for a number of other Indian origin politicians in the US. I mean, the work of Peter Frederick is really good in terms of mapping uh, how Hindutva politics plays into US-based politics. And you, of course, saw it with Hindus for Trump, that whole movement around it. And you have seen similar kinds of phenomenon in the UK, where Hindutva aligned organizations have been connected to lobbying around Brexit, have been connected to lobbying around particular right-wing organizations. And that has raised really important questions about foreign interference and where do we actually start operationalizing what is foreign interference, and how do we respond to that? Great. I want to, it's 8:07, so we are a little bit past our time, and I want to move us toward wrapping up. I just want to say thank you to each one of you for witnessing this moment. It's really important that we witness a moment such as this and create an alternative discursive infrastructure so that we have another voice, another point of entry to engaging this question. So as we wrap up, perhaps I could invite each one of you to just say your conclusion thoughts, and then we can wrap up.
So do you want to tell us who will go first?
Okay, how about we start in the opposite order of which we started. So perhaps we begin with you, Byron, then we go to you, Mr. Chida, then to you, Dr. Samant, and then to you, Dr. Raman.
Yeah, I've just seen one of the comments from YouTube asking if are there any New Zealand journalists which have a more balanced view, and I think a problem is that we haven't seen much journalism on this at all. I mean, even an unbalanced view. And possibly I'm just getting ahead of myself, and maybe there'll be something reported tomorrow. But I feel like among perhaps particularly Pākehā New Zealanders, which a group I'm part of, there's a real ignorance there of Hindutva, both in India and how it exists in the diaspora. And I think there's a real need for some journalism that can contextualize these things for a New Zealand audience and explain why Seymour and Lee saying these things is significant. And I'm just pleased that we were able to have a discussion like this, which hopefully does some of that, does some of the contextualizing for people and raises some awareness. And but I do hope there can be some more wider coverage of these issues in the media.
Oh, Kamran Bhai.
I think you're on mute, Kamran Bhai. Still can't hear you.
No.
How about we go to you, Sapna, and then we see if we can come back to Kamran Bhai. if the system is working well.
Okay, he's now actually muted himself. No.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, my final thoughts. There are no final thoughts, actually. I do, Richard Ram's question about are there any New Zealand journalists? Like Byron said, it's been a struggle to get New Zealand mainstream media to even consider this an issue. That how harmful this is to the social fabric of New Zealand. The last government and Ministry of Ethnic Communities, and this came out of the Royal Commission for 15th of March, was to establish an atmosphere where there's better social cohesion. But you can't really have social cohesion if you have Hindutva flourishing on this whenua. And the people of Hindutva have infiltrated pretty much all the infrastructure, including Radio New Zealand, that I have said before and pointed out multiple times. Unless and until Indians, whether we are from India or whether we are, second, third generation, fourth generation Aotearoa, or whether we have come to Aotearoa via Fiji, our whakapapa, unless and until we all identify with India, and unless and until we are recognized as a diverse and complex people, that is not just a singularity, that turns up for Diwali, where people, come in, 50, 60,000 to watch us do the Bollywood dancing. We will never be able to have any kind of empowerment, and that is the real struggle. Yeah.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Sapna. Dr. Rahman, and then Kamran, I will come back to you.
Thank you very much for enlightening us and highlighting the major points. It shows that we have got some way to go to educate, familiarize our New Zealand politicians, current politicians, with what India and Indians really mean. And when we talk about one people for all, one policy for all, what it means for people like us. I have received a Hamilton City Civic Award for working in the Indian community, for uplifting the Indian community. I've also received Queen's Service Order Award for doing the same thing, for working in the Indian community. How much we have done over the years in New Zealand. We are all part of the Indian community, Muslims and Hindus, and I hope our Hindu brothers can also recognize this, that we're all working for India, for the betterment of India, for the uplift of India. So I'd just like to leave it there.
Kia ora. Thank you so much. Kamran bhai? We still can't hear you. Okay. It's a system problem, so apologies for that, but thank you for what you were able to share with us in that part that you were. It was amazing to hear your voice. I just want to say three things. First of all, it was so beautiful to hear each of your voices, and your voices represent what it is like to build a space to hear to diversity of ideas, diversity of thoughts around issues, and what it is to actually interrogate the idea of community by opening up the idea of community. So it was really beautiful to have this Corero. I also think that what each of you did today is participate in the act of witnessing, and witnessing is really important in terms of the work of sustaining democracies. I also think it's really important that we engage the question of building bridges, because just as we are in the midst of experiencing this large-scale onslaught of Hindutva on India's Muslims. We are witnessing in Ayodhya sort of an ecosystem that is starting to target Tetiriti. And we, as I showed in that little bit of an excerpt, that's not a whole lot of empirical evidence, but it points to something in terms of the intersections of Hindutva and anti-Maori sentiments and anti-Maori racism. And I think it's really critical also at this point to build bridges with Tangata Whenua, to anchor ourselves in questions of Tetiriti and the values that Tetiriti offers in terms of the values of Aroha, Manakitanga, and what does it mean to uphold the principles of Tetiriti, to really engage with Tangata Whenua in that question as we engage in challenging Hindutva in Aotearoa. And finally, I want to highlight how important dialogue is. As you demonstrate, dialogue is really critical in bringing up unheard voices. And this is not some facile sense of dialogue where the control is held by those in majoritarian power, but really listening to voices that are typically unheard and voices that are typically erased. And that's where we hear from you, Dr. Rahman, from you, Kamran Bhai, in terms of the experiences of Muslims in being unheard in sort of the various structures of the state. So that gives us a lot to think about. I thank you, our audience, for joining us. I also want to thank Richard Torres, KS digital producer, for working in the evening to help us have this event on fairly short notice. Thanks to each one of you for your generosity on coming on to have this conversation on such short notice. Really grateful for that. Thanks to our audience for viewing and for joining in this conversation. I do want to wrap up with the Shanti mantra. I think it is important that we as Hindus, those of us that identify as Hindus, also find ways of enacting our religion in ways that offer values of peace, inclusiveness, and openness that is critical to countering Hindutva. So I wrap up with an English translation of the Shanti mantra. O God, lead us from darkness to light. O God, lead us from death to immortality. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti unto all. O Lord God Almighty, may there be peace in celestial regions. And this invitation for peace is one that truly opens up the space that doesn't perform this idea of peace while excluding, but invites in different ideas of peace, knowing that we can work together to build peace. Thank you so much.